Stick. Go right ahead.
Thanks, Colleen, and welcome to the January 2023 website chat. As I said, Friday the 13th. Really glad you could all be with us today. Let's see if I am going to figure this out. So just a few Zooming reminders. I think you're all getting very, very adept at managing Zoom to communicate through these website chats. So a few things we want to cover today. I want to talk a little bit about the 2023 legislative session and how that is shaping up. And then I am joined by Kara and Rebecca from the State Library. They're going to share some information about our hotspot lending program. And then Colleen is going to share an introduction to our Moodle site, MSL Learn. So let's go ahead and get started. Talking a little bit about the 2023 session. Want to make sure that you're all aware of House Bill 91. Those of you who've been through the legislative session process with us for the last decade or so will be familiar with the fact that we have what's called a statutory appropriation that is the funding mechanism for all of you to receive your state aid from the state through the state library. That piece of legislation was first created back in 2013, and periodically those statutory appropriations have to be reauthorized. And so 2023 is the year that the state aid has to be reauthorized. We've been talking about that for a few months now. House Bill 91 is that piece of legislation. And in addition to extending the sunset date for that piece of statutory appropriation, the legislation will also allow tribal college libraries who meet public library standards to be eligible for state aid as well. We have an update even from this slide. The bill was heard on January 4th in the State House Administration Committee. They did take executive action on the bill this past Wednesday. The bill passed unanimously out of committee, so I was thrilled for that. We had thought the bill was going to be heard by the full House on the House floor early next week, but we got an alert this morning that it's actually going to be heard on the House floor this afternoon in the floor session that begins at 1 p.m. So I thought I would just drop a link into the chat so that if you are interested and have a little time today and you want to listen to that floor debate, you can do so online. The bill's being sponsored by Courtney Sprunger, a representative out of the Flathead Valley. She's doing just a fantastic job. I couldn't be happier. I hope you all saw an urgent alert come across Wired this morning from Rachel Ron from the MLA's Government Affairs Committee, encouraging librarians to reach out to your legislators so that they are aware of this important piece of legislation that's coming up for a vote today. We've been doing a lot of work to engage with different legislative groups, including our budget committee and others, to make sure that they're aware of this legislative action, and hopefully will vote in support of this legislation. This particular vote that will occur today, if it doesn't pass, then that's a concern, a pretty significant concern. If it does pass, we still have a little ways to go. The bill will then go to, I believe, the House Appropriations Committee. It typically needs to go through House Appropriations. And so from the vote today, it should get referred to that committee for another hearing. And then it would go to the House floor again for what's called third reading. It's just a kind of a perfunctory vote. And then the bill would go to the Senate and go through the same process on the Senate side before going to the governor for signature. So today's vote is a very important vote. It is just one more step in the process. I did want to give just a huge shout out to some of our colleagues that have been involved in supporting this legislation. Of course, the MLA Government Affairs Committee, Rachel Ron, and Alyssa Wallenties from Lewistown have done a great job chairing that committee. Angela Archuleta, the president of MLA, and all of her support. Alyssa Wallenties, Mitch Grady, and Joy Bridwell also all offered testimony at that January 4th hearing, and they did just a fantastic job of really conveying the importance of library work and this funding to their communities and ultimately our legislators' constituents. So huge shout out for them. That's never easy to get up and share your thoughts in front of a legislative committee like that. And they just did an awesome job. And I really want to thank MLA and MLA's lobbyists from Central House Strategies for all of the support that they're providing us to make sure that this really critical piece of legislation passes. Just a couple of other bills that you'll hear me talking about or see in updates as we go through the legislative session. Senate Bill 60 is a bill that would authorize the state library to administer what's called a real-time network. A real-time network is essentially a network of GPS stations that are permanently fixed around the state that communicate with one another in real time. And they allow for people to connect to that network to provide hyper-precise location information. Think of hyper-precise survey information. If any of you are familiar with GPS-enabled agricultural implements like tractors that connect to GPS equipment, the network can operate that kind of equipment. It's used to operate autonomous vehicles as autonomous vehicles become more and more of a reality, that they can be used to operate drones and that kind of technology where you need hyper-precise location information. The reason the state library is, of course, interested in this technology is that it gives us better location information to help us continue to improve our GIS data sets that we make available. And we also have the expertise to coordinate with partners, which are necessary to help support this kind of network. So the bill authorizes the state library to operate the network, and in this case will allow us to collect funds from users in order to fund the operation of that network. That bill is up for a hearing on Monday afternoon. So working with our GIS committee, we're involved in supporting that particular piece of legislation. And then there's one more piece of legislation that will be an agency bill. It hasn't been introduced yet. The current bill draft number is LC 3451. And that's a bill that we've been working on with the governor's office to make some updates to our GIS statutes, our Land Information Act, and our Natural Resource Information statutes. So 3 bills that are agency bills that we have been working on. There is a lot of other pieces of legislation that may have impact to Montana libraries. And we're really working closely with the Government Affairs Committee of the Library Association to make sure that we are all aware of and monitoring these different kinds of bills that really impact intellectual freedom, that could have implications for collections in libraries and the programming that is offered in libraries. There's bills that could impact libraries' abilities to have permanent dedicated mill levies in the future, bills that would put automatic sunsets on those kinds of levies. So I really, really encourage you to pay attention to the communication that is coming primarily through Wired. When you see urgent requests to communicate with legislators, it's important for you to be aware of and pay attention to those kinds of things, because these bills may have very direct implications for you and your library boards and the operations of your libraries. It's going to be a wild ride over the next several months. This is definitely a marathon and not a sprint, and I hope you'll all stay engaged. And as always, if you have questions about any bills you're seeing or hearing about, or questions about the legislative process, please do let me know. The other thing I wanted you all to be aware of is that we are going to again this year be hosting a library legislative night. That event will be held on February 7th at, it's actually 5 p.m. in the Montana Capitol Rotunda. If you've come to this event in the past, you'll know that we've typically held it at the Montana State Library, but since we've moved, we're now planning to host that event at the Montana Capitol in the Rotunda. Really excited about that opportunity. You know, it's going to be a great way to interface with legislators right there in the Capitol building. February 7th is also the day the state library's budget will be heard before the Education Budget Committee. So if you want to come a little bit early that day, you're welcome to sit in and listen to discussion about the state library's budget. MLA is also continuing to push for additional funding under the umbrella of state aid to support a number of different statewide programs. As you know, we had put forward an ask for about $4.8 million that would provide funding for various statewide programs, as well as an additional appropriation for e-resources, continuation of the hotspot program, and other kinds of efforts. Those funds were not included in the governor's budget, so the state library is not in a position to advocate for them, but we can continue to provide information about that request. And the MLA Government Affairs Committee and lobbyists are working really hard with members of our education budget subcommittee to try to move forward those requests through the budget process. So that morning, February 7th, will be an opportunity for them and anyone else to advocate to that committee for the addition of those kinds of funds to help support libraries. MLA is going to be hosting some training that afternoon about how best to communicate with legislators, and then we'll have that event in the evening. That event will include dinner and beverages. There'll be information from libraries and the Montana State Library prepared for the legislators who attend. I know MLA is again planning to have kind of a photo booth and a social media campaign involving legislators. So it's always just a really fun event. We have a great turnout from legislators. I hear it's always one of the highlights of the legislative session for a lot of the legislators. So please mark your calendars for February 7th. Okay, let me pause there and I'll ask for any questions that you might have, and we can go ahead and take a quick break before we turn things over to Kara and Rebecca. All right. You're welcome, Rachel. You're doing a fantastic job. All right, Kara and Rebecca, take it away.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Colette. Hi, everyone. My name is Kara Orban, and I am your point person at the State Library for the management of the Hotspot program. And Rebecca Camp is your data coordinator, who's going to be going over our fantastic dashboard with all of our data about the Hotspot program. And if you were at the commission meeting or listening in December, you may have heard some of this. We had the opportunity to share some highlights of the Hotspot program with the commission at their December meeting. And so we're going to summarize that for you today. And I know many of you are participating in the Hotspot program. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about how this program got started, how we identified it as a priority, basically how it's working. Rebecca is going to provide an overview of the data dashboard, and then we'll briefly touch on what the future might look like for the program. So a few years ago in 2019, the State Library contracted with a company called Saddle Peak Technologies to complete the Internet Toward Gigabit Libraries Toolkit, which many of you may remember. And the purpose of the toolkit was to gain a better understanding of the state of broadband and related infrastructure in Montana. So Saddle Peak visited 115 public library locations, and then the State Library worked with researchers from Simmons University School of Library and Information Science to analyze that data against the national standards for bandwidth targets as established by the FCC. And some other findings included some very interesting statistics. 24% of public libraries in the state reported being the only source of free Wi-Fi in their communities. And among the other 76% that did have other Wi-Fi sources, those sources included coffee shops, restaurants, bars, businesses, hospitals, visitor centers, basically places where people would be expected to spend money or to only stay for a very brief time. And as for public library connectivity and infrastructure specifically, the report identified the top areas of improvement needed for broadband speed and wiring and hardware updates. And so from this report, the State Library was able to identify two major needs. One was the need to help libraries upgrade their internet connections and hardware. And I know that some of you have been working with Tracy to get your internal wiring updated through the ARPA funds that we received. And the other need was to help Montanans more easily connect to the internet outside the library, wherever they may have that need. And this was very timely because then, of course, in spring 2020, as libraries and schools and offices were closing because of the start of the pandemic, we were seeing this urgent need for internet access. And the State Library received emergency pandemic relief funds from the federal government to aid in providing library services, and connectivity was definitely a top priority. And so we got this program off the ground with a mix of state, federal, and private funds. The State Library has partnered on this project with T-Mobile and Verizon to support the program. So wherever libraries are participating, they determine which service provider will work best for them, and then we can provide those devices to them. So some libraries have both. This is a Verizon hotspot. I'm sure most of you have experience with these. Our goal was to provide one hotspot for approximately every 1,500 Montanans through public libraries across the state. The mobile devices come with a prepaid 1-year unlimited data plan, and that makes it easier for libraries to manage and the devices, not having to worry about a patron using up all the data, having it get cut off. And so the State Library is paying for all the monthly data costs associated with the hotspots through the end of this fiscal year, which ends in June. We were using ARPA, and now we are on federal LSTA to close out that time frame. And we'll talk more about what that time frame looks like going forward later. So we have a lot of resources for libraries participating in the hotspot program, which we don't have time to go through right now, but I'll put the link in the chat. In case you're not familiar with that page, you'll find everything that you need to manage and promote the program on that page. So I am going to ask Rebecca to walk through the dashboard.
Fabulous. Yeah, so as Kara mentioned, the Montana State Library maintains a dashboard for the Hotspot Lending Program. And I pasted a direct link to the dashboard in the chat. But you can also get to this dashboard and all of MSL's dashboards by going to msl.mt.gov. And then if you scroll to the bottom of the page, you'll find a link to our dashboards. This particular dashboard is updated on a monthly cycle. It tends to have about a 1-month lag depending on when we receive our statements from Verizon and T-Mobile. And I just want to walk you through some of the trends that we're seeing on our hotspot lending program, as well as some of the background data. So as Kara mentioned, we found a need in communities for more access to high-speed internet. And 15% of Montana households report not having any access to the internet. And this is per the American Communities Survey from the US Census Bureau. Access is unevenly distributed across the state, with estimates of up to 32% of households without access in some counties. Now, keep in mind, these figures are just about access of any type, which could include broadband, satellite, cellular, or in some cases, dial-up. Census figures aren't telling us about access to high-speed broadband, but research from Broadband Now shows that Montana is actually ranked dead last among all states for access to 100 megabyte per second broadband. And moreover, only 5.8% of Montanans have access to 1 gigabyte broadband. This matters because high-speed internet is necessary for doing things like the Zoom call we're doing right now or streaming online courses. But these are tasks that can be accomplished using the hotspots. Monthly data consumption is the most accurate measure for us to use to look at how the devices are being used. We do collect circulation data, but it's not as consistent because we have libraries reporting using different integrated library systems, as well as some that are manually tracking. So we like to look at the gigabyte data use to see the trends in use. And what we're seeing is that they're being used more than ever. Even as the pandemic abates, we're still seeing that the hotspots are being used actually 26% more than at this point last year. So throughout the life of the program, the devices have been used over 1.4 million, have used over 1.4 million gigabytes of data, and it just continues to trend upward. And now that we're in the third year of the program, we can more accurately predict how the devices will be used in the future. And I'm just going to skip ahead a slide here because I got them out of order. But from what we can see here, if everything continues as it has been, we continue to have funding for these devices, we can predict that the growth is going to continue because the need is not going away. We also can see some trends like seasonal use. The devices are being used more heavily in the winter, as you might see in other areas of your library as well. So if these devices remain available to the public, we can expect that they'll continue to be used and to be used a lot. This previous slide is about how the devices are used at each individual library. And we are finding that they're used more in some communities than others. And why that is, we'll get into a little bit more in a moment here. Let's skip ahead to this slide. We also collect survey data from our library patrons that are using the hotspot devices. And we have found that per the user survey, about 70% of the patrons that borrow the hotspots either don't have any household access to the internet or they're relying on their cellular data. And then there's a remaining 30% of borrowers that report using the hotspots to bridge access. So these users might check out a hotspot to provide access while working in the field. So one use case that I've seen is people that work in agriculture. When they're out working in the field, they don't have access to the internet, so they may borrow a hotspot for a period of time for that. There's also people that are borrowing them while caring for relatives that don't have service or while they're traveling. Montanans report using the devices for many different tasks, but notably 48% of our hotspot users report using the devices for work or school tasks, such as completing homework, checking school information, working remotely, or applying for jobs. There's additional users that report informal types of educational uses, like maybe they're researching a topic of interest or learning a new skill, although it may not be tied to a formal school. The user survey also supports what we've been hearing from you, from our Montana libraries. The hotspots that are checked out are often checked out by repeat borrowers. 94% of our users state that they plan to borrow a hotspot again. This is telling us that the need for access doesn't end when the checkout period concludes. And, we've heard that feedback at the MLA Fall Retreat. Our partners mentioned this pattern, and also our academic institutions mentioned that with more devices, it could help reach students that often need the device for an entire semester to complete their coursework. So I mentioned that some of the libraries use the devices more heavily than others. And we found that there is a relationship between per capita data use and the percent of households without internet access, and also a relationship between use and the percent of individuals living below poverty level. But even with that considered, some libraries have more success than others. For example, Bighorn County has reported the most gigabyte data use out of all the libraries in the state. Their county is ranked, I believe it's 51st in the state for access, with only 28% of households with 28% of households not having access to the internet. So as we continue with this program, there's some things we can do with that data to help move hotspots to where there's greater need. So that's the hotspot dashboard in a nutshell. All that information is accessible to you by going to our website, and it can be exported using the controls at the bottom right of the dashboard. And I'll turn it back over to Kara.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, we have some really cool data, and it's really interesting to think about the implications of the data as we think about the future of the program. As I mentioned earlier, we have funding through the end of June to support the program in its entirety. We're currently supporting nearly 1,000 hotspots across the state. So that's quite a lot. We recognize it is still a need, and it's a need that most libraries can't fully budget for on their own. And as Jenny mentioned, the MLA is sponsoring a $4.8 million budget request and advocating for that funding to be added to our budget, which would include funding to sustain the hotspot program. If we see a reduced amount, or if we don't receive any of that funding request, then in a couple of months, we'll be building a transition plan for libraries to try to find alternative funding, or to help them to adjust their programs if they wish to continue independently of this state contract. So we'll have to see what happens. In the long term, we know that the hotspots are good for filling in gaps for a few years. Rebecca said it's a good bridge for people, and that's a good way to put it. They're not a sustainable solution for the larger problem of establishing broadband access in Montana. And so we really do see this program as a bridge to more permanent internet access, and hopefully we'll have some opportunities to allow that to come to fruition as well. So please feel free to ask any questions, or be in touch with me or Rebecca if you have any questions about the hotspot program. And thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks, Kara and Rebecca. I know this has been a really important and successful program, and I think helping all of you understand sort of the depth of information and data that we're collecting as we plan for how to support this program in the future, we thought would be really informative for all of you as well. All right. Colette, let's talk about MSL Learn.
That sounds great. And I do want to just say, if folks have questions while we have Kara and Rebecca and Jenny here, don't hesitate to either speak up or to put your questions in chat. We all learn when we speak up with the questions that we have. So like I said, if you want to jump in now, or wait until I just have a couple of things to say about MSL Learn, we can certainly spend some more time on your questions too. So what is MSL Learn? And a few of you joined us on Tuesday for the first of our series of MSL Learn webinar series sessions. That session introduced both this series of webinars that we're doing on the second Tuesday and the last Tuesday of each month. But a main part of that presentation was about our online learning platform, which is called MSL Learn. I just wanted to invite folks, and I'll put a link in the chat. We've opened up one course as of right now for you to be able to take for continuing education credit. It is a course that teaches you and gives you the opportunity to learn a lot more about the Montana State Library and all of the services that it provides. The image that you see on the screen is actually a shot of the homepage of that site. I want to let you know that you can use the same credentials that you use to log into Aspen to log into MSL Learn. And we are looking forward to expand the offerings of courses that we have for you over the next couple of months. We have a course on Aspen that will be coming up very soon. I mentioned we have this course, the Montana State Library Greater State of Knowledge course that you can enroll in just by clicking on that link and self-enrolling. It takes about an hour, but as I said, we're kind of starting slowly and building our catalog of courses as we're able to identify those topics and put together really good content that is very much Montana specific and with the context and the questions that you all have as leaders within your libraries in the state of Montana. So I'll put the link in the chat to the site and just welcome anyone and everybody to try it out. I think that with the designs that we have for our courses and the topics that you'll see coming up, I think it's going to be both a flexible way to learn and to earn those continuing education credits, but also just a great way to connect with information on your own time and on your own schedule. So with that, I would turn it back to Jenny unless there are any questions and kind of take us through these next couple of things.
Great. Well, thanks, Colleen. We're just really excited to be able to offer the MSL Learn site for just a wide variety of learning needs. We hope it'll really enhance the learning outcomes that we want to support for all of you. As always, we want to share information about how you can stay connected with us and learn more about the priorities and work of the State Library through our website, newsletters, our help desk, of course, Wired, our Aspen events calendar, growing content on our MSL YouTube channel. And then, of course, we're always here to support you. We're just an email or a phone call away. Like I said before, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for all of you to really stay connected and tuned into Wired to keep abreast of what's going on in the legislative session. I sometimes worry that the session can feel a little bit remote to some of you who aren't here in Helena, but there are a lot of bills this session that can have very, very real consequences for libraries. So please do stay connected, stay informed, ask questions, and we're always here to help and support one another. So thanks for being with us today. And just a reminder that House Bill 91 is going to come up for a vote here after the 1 o'clock hour. I put a link into the chat. So if you're interested in the legislative sausage making, I encourage you to tune in and to listen to that debate. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to hang on and see if anybody else has any questions about anything we talked about or anything else you might have heard about at the State Library that you want to ask about.
And I was going to offer too, Jenny, for those who haven't made their way to the legislative website, I'll kind of switch gears on our screen sharing here and just kind of give a visual for everybody to see what that looks like. So if you go to the link that Jenny provided or just go to leg.mt.gov, you can watch and listen. That's right here up front and center, or towards the bottom of the page. There's another link there, but really, if you look at the streaming schedule, you can also watch recordings of any of those sessions, but the ability to see what's going on from the convenience of, sitting at your own desk and being able to hear and see, it really is empowering, and it's something that I recommend for anybody to try out. So that's how you get there. And I'll just go back here one screen. That's leg.mt.gov. Click on watch and listen, and you'll see a whole bunch of things that might be of interest to you.
Thanks, Colette. Very helpful. Thanks, Jackie.
With that, I think I'll probably close our recording, and I'll get that posted to the YouTube channel and also to this event in Aspen. For those of you who joined us today, I've got a list of everybody who was with us, and I'll just verify that those credits for you, those who want it. If you have any questions about how to claim those credits in Aspen, just ping me, and I'm happy to help work you through that. But with that, thank you so much. Our next website chat is scheduled for Friday, February 10th. And we'll just have all kinds of new and exciting
information. Absolutely. Yeah. And I hope to see a lot of you here in Helena on February 7th.
Let us hope so. That would be great.